Hey folks, this is Riker with a video on upcoming action RPG Wolcen. Now, it was about a year ago that I first brought you folks a video about Wolcen. The game has been in development since 2015, previously under the name Umbra, and at the time we first covered it, it was an alpha and technically still is. However, there is a beta going on right now. That sounds contradictory. They have temporary betas, and when the beta goes down, it goes back to the alpha version. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Now, Wolcen is a game that I've always felt has a lot of promise to be the next big action RPG. It's setting itself up to very much be a next generation action RPG, and the concerns really are just whether it can actually deliver on its promises and see the light of day in a reasonable time frame. So since it's been about a year since we first took a look at this game, I figure we would revisit it now while it's in beta and give you guys an update on the progress that we're seeing. Now, the first technical beta took place about a month ago. This is now Technical Beta Phase 2, which runs from November 22nd to December 6th, and the main purpose of this beta is to test multiplayer. The devs want to test the stability of their 14 international multiplayer servers. So as I dove back into Wolcen, which now has a new logo, a new loading screen, a new menu screen, the first thing that immediately struck me was, again, just how visually gorgeous this game is. From the moment you create your character, you can see that the character models have been vastly improved, and they were already pretty good to begin with. And then loading into the game itself, the environments, again, absolutely breathtaking in places. They've added a lot of Z-axis, a lot of vertical depth to the world. Things that are not part of your direct path but are distant in the environment and make the world seem very rich. This is probably the best looking action RPG I've ever seen. In general, they've added a number of new enemies, and in fact, if you've played the alpha, the experience is very different in the beta with regards to the environments that you visit and the enemies that you fight. While you do have a good number of your run-of-the-mill cannon fodder enemies that are easy to dispatch, there are a good number of more difficult to defeat foes. There's one monster, for instance, I believe called the Beta Screecher. It's not too difficult to fight, but one of its attacks is that it stands in place and shoots out a cone of sound. And if you stand in there and just face tank it, you're gonna have a bad time. And that's one design philosophy that I like and you see perpetrated across other enemies. Basically that the enemies have attacks that are either telegraphed or that you can dodge or avoid, wherein your player's skill can save you, rather than just getting hit by unavoidable damage as a sort of way to ramp up difficulty. To me, that's a very cheap way of making something difficult. Because then it's not about player skill, it's just a gear check, or a build check even. Did you build enough toughness, or do you have enough armor to survive this attack? There was another boss similar to the Butcher. Basically, he visually looks a little bit like the Butcher, and we're talking about Diablo 3's Butcher, because he also does this attack where he shoots out a series of, I guess, harpoon chains, kind of like Scorpion, kind of like the Butcher, except this combines with a pull. So if you get hooked by one of these chains, you get pulled to him, and then he also has another attack that shoots out a wave of energy that you would need to dodge. And that actually touches upon another thing that I noticed, which is that my previous strategy was really to just play a mage and shoot fireballs at everything and stay away from enemies. They never hit me. I could have no health, just focus purely on damage and fireball things. A lot of enemies now have ways to close the distance, either bringing you to them or bringing them to you. So my old tactics aren't going to work anymore. And I like that. I enjoy finding ways to cheese a game. I know that sounds cheap, but to me that's outsmarting the game. But similarly, when a game finds a way to counter my cheesy tactics, I gotta give kudos to the game. There's this other enemy, I think he's called the Sadistic Thug. Another tough enemy, not quite the same as this Butcher guy, which was, I believe, the toughest foe that we fought. And I say we here because you see me playing multiplayer with my fiancée Bankisha, but the Sadistic Thug is a tough enemy that has a number of ways of closing distance with you. He's melee. He doesn't have a ranged attack, but he has a leap attack, so he'll jump onto you to close the distance. And then he also has a whirlwind attack that he tends to pair with that, so he'll jump on you, and then sometimes also activate a whirlwind. So Your natural reaction when you get jumped on is, okay, well, I'm just gonna evade now. I'm gonna run away from you. And you can't do anything because you're melee. Well, he whirlwinds, and his whirlwind is just as fast, if not faster, than your running speed. So that's where the dodge roll comes in. Now, this is a mechanic that I really like about this game, the dodge roll. Think of it like a Demon Hunter's Vault on steroids. And your ability to dodge is limited by your stamina resource. So if you've already consumed all your dodges, and this dude jumps on you and starts whirlwinding, well, you are poop out of luck. Should have better managed your stamina, or you can pop a stamina potion. Now, as for the combat itself, the combat feels crisp. It's been a long time since I played Wolcen, but I don't remember it feeling quite this good. Now, one thing that I really compliment Diablo 3 on is its combat, the feel of combat, the impacts, the animations, everything is so crisp, the sound effects. Combat feels very satisfying. And I think I've finally found a game now that can rival Diablo 3 in how crisp that combat feels. There's a lot of things that come into play in building the feel of combat. It's the delays, it's the animations, it's the sound effects. This is being executed really well at this point. Your impacts feel impactful. The targeting, the attacking, it doesn't feel clumsy, it's smooth. One thing that I remember complaining about in Wolcen was that it lacked certain sound cues for attack powers, and I didn't notice anything like that in the beta. Everything seems to be there. I do have one complaint about the feel of combat, and that's it's not very obvious, at least to me, when you're about to die. In Diablo 3, for instance, as you're getting low on health, your screen starts flashing, it becomes very clear, danger, danger, take a potion, get out of there. Whereas I didn't quite feel that in Wolcen. I was going to say Umbra. And that actually leads us to talk about the resource system, which again we've covered fully in our first video. If you haven't seen that, I encourage you to check that out. But basically, the resource system is very unique to this game. You have Umbra, which is just mana, and you have, I believe it's called Rage, which is your physical mana. So spells cost Umbra, and physical or martial-based attacks cost Rage. And these two resources are paired in that as you build Rage, you lose Umbra, and vice versa. You typically start, your default state is to have max Umbra and no Rage, and you build up Rage over time with Rage generating attacks. Now in this playthrough, I decided to run an Archer, a martial-based ranged attacker. In previous playthroughs, I'd mostly played mages. And what I found was that my combat tactics mostly revolved around popping a lot of rage potions. By 10th level, you unlock all 5 of your potion slots, and I had 1 potion slot devoted to health, 1 to stamina, and then the rest, 3, to rage. So rather than enter a battle and use rage generators to build up rage, I'll just pop potions constantly to be able to constantly shoot out my martial attack powers. And I'm not sure I really like this system. It doesn't feel rewarding to be generating your rage via potions, at least to me. It feels like the game's not supposed to be played this way, because if it is supposed to be played this way, I don't know that this is a very enjoyable playstyle. Now, to be fair, you can't just pop your potions forever. They have cooldowns. They have a limited number of charges, and these charges replenish over time. But just like in Diablo 2, I never really liked the idea of popping mana potions in order to make my build work. But that's a personal preference. Now, as an archer, there were 3 skills that I used in my build. And one criticism I have to give here is the names that they're giving their skills. They're very fancy names, very cool sounding names, but completely impractical names that I cannot see the player base using. For instance, they have a power that is basically multi-shot. They call it Strings of Kristian. No one's gonna call it Strings of Kristian, guys. No one can pronounce Kristian. We gotta go with shorter, punchier names. I get that you don't want to call it multi-shot because Diablo 3 calls it multi-shot, Diablo 2 called it multi-shot, but I don't know, call it arrow spray, just anything. When we're talking about skills, we gotta go with more descriptive names. There's another power called Arrow's Wail, which is basically like Rain of Vengeance. Just call it Rain of Arrows. When people are talking about your game, you want them to be able to understand each other easily. You don't want people to have memorized every skill name to understand in a conversation to follow. If someone isn't intimately familiar with what all these skills are, they're gonna have no idea what strings of Kristian are. But if you say it's arrow spray, they'll get it instantly. But really, the fact that I'm spending so much time complaining about skill names just goes to show how little I have to complain about in general. So of these 3 skills, again, we've got multi-shot, and it differs from Diablo 3 multi-shot because it's not an instant fire. There's a moment of wind-up, so you can't just spam it super fast. There is that slight charge-up time, but it feels a lot more impactful. Every multi-shot feels more meaningful. And I would like a way to build up that attack speed or reduce that attack delay, and I'm sure they'll probably have stuff like that in their rune system. So in Wolcen, to bring you back up to speed, as you level up a skill, you unlock skill runes, where basically you have to choose between one rune or another rune. For instance, with multi-shot, at some point your choice is, do you want more projectiles, or do you want your current projectiles to deal more damage? So with my archer character, I got him to level 10, which is the max level in the beta, and I got all 3 of those skills up to level 10, which is again the max in the beta. And the power that I was the least impressed with was Rain of Vengeance, which I was surprised about because it is the longest cooldown power at a whopping 8 seconds, but it's the power you use the least frequently because it has the longest cooldown and the highest resource cost, and yet I was expecting it to feel more impactful. Maybe I was expecting there to be more arrows raining down, or it to deal more damage, or I don't know, it didn't feel as good as I thought it would. Multi-shot feels really good, and the one I was really surprised about and very, very happy with was basically their version of Chakram. They call it Phantom Blades, and depending on the runes you take, you could have it travel in a circle. I found that to be a little impractical, but maybe there's just a learning curve there and you can make it really useful, because you could aim the circle in different ways depending on how you let it fly. But what I found really interesting is how well all 3 of these skills synergize together. The Chakram power, Phantom Blades, there's no resource cost. It's on a form of a cooldown in that every 4 seconds you generate 1 charge and you can hold up to 2 charges. So you can let fly 2 quick Phantom Blades, and then 4 seconds later you'll have a new one. It'll be 3 seconds if you take the rune that reduces the cooldown. Now, Phantom Blades is a really satisfying skill to use. You shoot it out, mow down a nice area of enemies ahead of you. I love it. It's not as powerful as multi-shot, but it shouldn't be. It's a free attack, whereas your multi-shot, you need to build up some rage first. And then your Rain of Vengeance, that's the one that's supposed to be your heavy hitter. So when I'd come up against the really big bosses, that's when I would bust out the Rain of Vengeance. The area is rather small, so while you'd think maybe this was to handle a big crowd, that's what your multi-shot is for. Rain of Vengeance to me felt like the skill to bust out to take out single targets. But a problem with the Rain of Vengeance is that it's a dot. It deals damage over time as the arrows come down, and the damn enemies tend to move out of the way as it's coming down. So finally you unlock a rune that lets you deal all the damage instantly, but it deals reduced damage. Overall, I'm not very happy with Rain of Vengeance, but multi-shot and Phantom Blades feel great. And throughout all of this, I was using a bow. I had the option to also use a pistol, but I decided to be a bow user for this playthrough, and I kind of regret it, because with a bow, you can't hold anything else in your other hand. A bow uses up both slots, it seems. I tried to equip a number of different things, and you can't. Whereas with a pistol, you can dual-wield pistols, or you can go pistol and something else in your other hand, and that opens up a lot more options with regards to what skills you can use. So Bankisha, for instance, was using a pistol, and I forget what it's called, but it's some kind of a mage offhand item, which was allowing her to cast spells in addition to doing her pistol stuff, such as, ironically enough, all of the bow spells that I could cast, which makes a bow animation show on her when she uses it, which I suppose is a bit of a criticism. It kind of doesn't make sense. She's wielding a pistol, and then she uses her bow power, and a bow magically appears. I don't know. If there'd be some way of making that also work with a gun, animation-wise, I think that would probably be better. But it's a small complaint. Anyway, she was able to use much more than just 3 skills, whereas I was using basically the only 3 skills currently available in the beta. Of course, there's going to be more in the full game, but I just felt a lot more limited with regards to what items I could wield. Now, it was my choice. I could have gone to a pistol at any point, I just stubbornly wanted to be a bow user. And eventually, my patience paid off because toward the very end of my playthrough, before the servers went down and I couldn't log back in for the day, I found the unique bow in the game. And what's really cool about this unique bow, which at first was a complaint, I'm like, what the heck, this bow does no damage. Relative to my currently equipped bow, a rare bow, it did significantly less damage. But what it did was it added 2 additional projectiles. That was its unique power, which I found really cool. So my basic attack, instead of shooting 1 arrow, was shooting 3. So yes, every individual shot was doing less damage than with my previous bow, but I'm shooting out 3 times as many projectiles. And the best part is that it carries over to your attack powers as well. So my multi-shot is now shooting out 2 additional projectiles. And even cooler, the Phantom Blade, instead of shooting out 1 chakram, it's shooting out 3. I love that. Now, taking a look at what other unique items are currently available, I think that bow is actually the most interesting one. So I'm hoping that there will be more uniques that have this sort of game-changing or gameplay-altering effect on them, but there's a lot of time for them to develop more uniques. Now, Wolcen has a gem system, similar to Diablo 2, but there's many more gems than in Diablo 2. And honestly, I'm not really sure why, because it seems some of the different gem types are redundant with each other. There are gems that look different and go by different names, but that do virtually the same thing that the other gem does. So I'm not exactly clear on what's going on there. They did say they want to make more changes to the gem system. I'm just not sure why did they just stop those redundant gems from dropping altogether, or if there is some design decision or design intent behind having these redundant gems. It's very much not clear to me. So ultimately, I hope they either make those redundant gems unredundant, non-redundant, or just remove them altogether. Now, as for the multiplayer experience itself, in the start, the servers did seem mostly stable. But then as we approached peak hours, after work hours, the servers became increasingly less stable. We were getting a little bit more lag spikes, more rubber banding. One particularly bad thing was actually we encountered an enemy boss, one of those butcher guys that I flat out couldn't see. Bunkisha was calling him out and I'm like, where? I don't see this guy. And then I got killed by him. But again, the game's in beta, so it's expected that there's going to be bugs. There was some weird things like T-posing sometimes when you would kill an enemy. But I do have to commend the game for not crashing at all this time. That was a problem that I would have back in alpha. The game would crash periodically on me. I have not gotten a crash at all during beta. Now, when you die in multiplayer, there's an interesting mechanic. It's sort of a revive mechanic similar to a battle royale game, where once your health drops to 0, you fall to the ground or you take a knee, and then your teammate has a limited amount of time to revive you. That is basically stand next to you and hold a button for X seconds in order to bring you back to life. Should your teammate fail to do that in time, you respawn in town. But I think my favorite thing about the multiplayer experience was really starting to see and imagine the synergies that we can see happen in builds. Bunkisha was using 2 particular spells that were very helpful to me. One was a healing spell where she lays down an area on the ground, and if you stand in that area, you regain health. And another was a crowd control, a freeze, that she can do a burst of freeze on enemies to hold them in place. So my mind's starting to think, and I'm like, okay, I can imagine in a 2-player composition, for instance, one person going pure DPS, pure glass cannon DPS, and then the other person going full-on support with heals, a big beefy tanky dude, full of crowd control. There was a very limited number of skills available in the beta, but I could only imagine in the full game the possibilities that we could end up with. Now, one disappointing thing I have to note is that the skill tree, the passive skill tree, was disabled during the beta. That tree is a huge selling point for me for this game. Now, I know it's not going away, it's just disabled for the beta, but I would have really liked to have still had it there for the beta. I guess it's undergoing some major revisions and they didn't have it ready, and they didn't need it for their purposes of testing the multiplayer. But it does heavily limit what we're able to really test with regards to builds, because how you build your character, how you effectively pick your character class, really is shaped through the passive skill tree. And because of that and other reasons, the current beta demo does get repetitive. You basically go into a randomly generated dungeon and you start to see the same tiles repeat themselves over and over, the same very similar levels repeat themselves over and over, and the same enemies repeat themselves over and over. And again, your max level is 10, which you can achieve in a very short amount of time. The max level on your skills is 10. But again, given the beta doesn't last very long, it's okay for there not to be very much content available in it. So overall, revisiting Wolcen, I am once again impressed by it. I was going through a period of, okay, we haven't had an update in a while, I'm starting to get disheartened. Is this game really ever going to release? I am seeing a good amount of progress being made here, a good amount of positive development. The game does look like it's getting better, and it sounds like what they're working on is a lot of stuff that they don't want to reveal, a lot of the campaign stuff they don't want to have spoiled. I was getting pretty skeptical about their implementation of multiplayer, but it looks like they're getting it working. So overall, I'm still very much looking forward to Wolcen. I still think it has the potential to be a next-gen action RPG that will compete with the other next-gen action RPGs. And I encourage everyone to keep following the development of Wolcen. And that's going to wrap up this video. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider becoming a Royal Raider on Patreon, where your support is immensely appreciated. We've got a variety of backer rewards, including behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more gaming content.